Today we are going to talk about the decline of the Roman Republic, and we recently just finished the episode called The Roman Conquest of Greece, which basically solidified Rome's power in the Mediterranean. But now, as we all know, with power comes responsibility, and then with responsibility comes takeover, as in this case. So we got to start off with the rise and fall of a guy named Tiberius Gracchus. Now, Tiberius Gracchus, he's a supporter of the plebs, which were the plebeian masses in Rome, or the commoners, as opposed to the patricians, who were the more wealthy people in Roman society. So Tiberius Gracchus, he served alongside Scipio Aemilianus in the Third Punic War and in the Numidian War. And when Tiberius Gracchus returned, his views on politics caused him and Scipio Aemilianus to kind of drift apart, because this guy, Tiberius Gracchus, like I said before, he's a supporter of the plebeians, and we have him getting elected as the plebeian tribune in order to represent the plebeian masses. He's very popular with the plebs for his reforms, and he advocated for a law in which the patrician elite or the senatorial elite would have to give up their lands so that the plebs and the peasants would have land of their own. And his reforms are actually really popular with the commoners, like I said before, because it benefited them. But due to the fact that it took away from the aristocracy, this led him to become very unpopular with the aristocracy. And eventually, his political rivals in the Senate would instigate a riot that would end up killing Gracchus in the riot. But his followers were enraged at this, and the political turmoil in Rome is just going to go downhill after the death of Tiberius Gracchus. So we have his brother here, Gaius Gracchus, who also comes to power at this time. He's also elected tribune of the plebs, and he's supported by a guy named Fulvius Flaccus and Gaius Carbo. And Fulvius Flaccus, he advocates for giving citizenship to Italian non-Romans, and Gaius Carbo is a staunch supporter of Gracchus's reforms. And Gracchus is a very skilled orator, as you can see in this picture here. He advocates for a lot of the same reforms that his brother Tiberius advocates for, like giving land to the plebs and military veterans, and he also wants the senatorial elite to have to pay for the grain supply in Rome and for the equipment of soldiers, such as clothing for soldiers who couldn't afford to get equipment. And then eventually, though, the political enemies move against them, and Gaius Gracchus and Gaius Carbo and Flaccus are eventually caught in this big brawl on a hill, and Gaius Gracchus and Gaius Carbo are forced to commit suicide, while Flaccus, during the brawl instigated by the political rivals, he ends up getting killed in the fight. And this just already, the death of Tiberius Gracchus was causing Rome's republic to become ever more politically violent. Now with the death of Gaius Gracchus and his allies, things are going to go downhill after this, because not only do we have political rivalry, we also have foreign intervention, because during this time the Jugurthine War begins in Numidia, or modern-day North Africa. So a guy named Jugurtha, he's a prince of the Kingdom of Numidia, which is a client state to Rome, and Jugurtha has a couple of brothers, but Jugurtha wants the throne, so he ends up killing his brother Adherbal, and Adherbal, before he was killed by Jugurtha, had asked Rome for assistance against Jugurtha, and Jugurtha, he doesn't comply with Rome's demands, and he even massacres an Italian population, so then Rome is forced to declare war on Jugurtha. Rome sends a guy named Lucius Calpurnius Bestia to try to defeat Jugurtha, but Jugurtha actually bribed him off for an unfavorable peace, and Bestia returned to Rome condemned as a traitor. And Jugurtha supposedly stated one time when he visited Rome on a diplomatic mission that he could buy the whole city since Rome had become so corrupt. And Rome also tries to send a guy named Spurius Postumius Albinus to defeat Jugurtha, but this guy ends up getting defeated by Jugurtha, and the Romans are forced to pass under the yoke, which is a form of humiliation back in these times. And a lot of people say that bribery was likely involved, like some of the Romans that were supporting Albinus were likely bribed to abandon him. And because of Jugurtha's victories, he is able to forge an alliance with the king of Mauritania named Bacchus. And then around the same time, Rome also faces another threat, but this is a completely new threat because the Germanic tribes known as the Cimbri, as well as the Teutons from modern-day Denmark and Germany, for whatever reasons that historians still debate, they migrated all the way south towards Roman holdings in northern Italy and Gaul, and they just defeat several Roman armies at Norea and Burgalia, and Rome suffers some heavy losses against these Germanic tribes. It's likely, I theorize, that they may have left this region, similar reason to why the Vikings came to invade England, because they just wanted land and land to grow their crops on. And around this time, two men rise in the political sphere in Rome. A guy named Gaius Marius is elected consul, while a guy named Lucius Cornelius Sulla is elected quaestor in Rome. All the while, Rome is facing foreign threats everywhere. And then Marius decides to take charge of the Numidian campaign against King Jugurtha, and Sulla decides also helps him out. And Marius and Sulla have an army around 40,000, and they defeat the Numidian 90,000 army at the Battle of Cirta, but Marius's next battle at Muthul is not decisive, and Jugurtha ends up fleeing to escape, and Jugurtha continues fighting a guerrilla war against Rome, and the war doesn't actually end until Sulla bribes Jugurtha's ally Bacchus to hand over Jugurtha as a prisoner, and therefore the Romans have Jugurtha captured and the Jugurthine War ends. However, though, even though Sulla was the one who helped to capture Jugurtha, Marius claims the victory for the war because he was the one that won some of the battles, and Marius ends up receiving a triumph in Rome while Sulla doesn't get any credit. So that causes kind of the beginning of a very deep divide with Marius and Sulla. And then soon, not long after this, Marius is also appointed command to fight the Cimbri tribes, and this is especially because the Cimbri destroy a Roman army at the Battle of Arausio, and Arausio is Rome's first really major defeat since losing to Hannibal in the Punic Wars. And Marius ends up defeating the Cimbri at Aquae Sextae as well as at Vercellae. And around the same time, Marius also reforms the Roman military into the legions, as you know, in the one in popular imagination, the one that conquered the Mediterranean. And so Marius is coming off a very successful commander in general, as well as a skilled politician. Around the same time, there are some servile rebellions in Sicily, some slave rebellions. I won't get into too much detail with it. All you need to know is that a guy named Lucullus is appointed, and Aquilius, and they crushed the slave rebellion. And this is where the fun begins. So in the east, in Anatolia, Sulla is appointed to govern there, and he appoints two client kings in Cappadocia and Bithynia. These are two kingdoms that pay tribute to Rome. But at the same time, a Greek king named King Mithridates the Sixth of Pontus, he begins an expansionist policy against the Romans, and he allies with Tigranes of Armenia. And the two of them, they invade Rome's client states. Around at the same time, though, Rome is also having some problems in Italy, and a guy named Drusus, he also advocates for Italian citizenship, just like Flaccus earlier. And then Drusus is murdered by his political rivals for doing so, and then because of that, the Italic tribes rebel against Rome in the Social War. Around the same time, Aquilus evacuates the Cappadocian and Bithynian kings, while Pontus of Mithridates just takes over. And keep in mind, Pontus is one of the Greek kingdoms that formed after Alexander the Great died, so Rome is still dealing with those Greek kings to this day. And Sulla will take command of the social war, and he crushes the rebels in southern Italy and ends it. And now we have political backstabbing. So Sulla's success in the social war led him to be placed in the army that will march east and face Mithridates of Pontus. However, while Sulla was marching east against Mithridates, Marius and his allies took power in Rome, and Sulpicius used his position in the Senate to remove Sulla of command and instead place the command on Marius. Keep in mind, though, Marius was a supporter of the plebeians, Sulla supported the patricians, so they had two different political ideologies, and that turned them into enemies. So Sulla felt betrayed by Marius because Sulla had fought alongside Marius. Even and then he felt that Marius was just backstabbing him when removing him of command and instead taking the command himself, because Marius wanted to place himself in command of the army to fight Mithridates. And then Sulla decides to instead turn his army around and march on Rome itself. And this is the first time in history that a Roman general marches on Rome. It won't be the last time. And Marius is forced to flee to Africa due to the fact that he doesn't actually have any forces. So around the same time, though, due to this kind of civil war between the two Roman aristocrats, Mithridates conquers all of Anatolia, and he orders a genocide of Romans and Italians in Anatolia. It's known as the Asiatic Vespers, and it's actually considered one of the first genocides in history. So Rome is fighting itself while it's being invaded by its enemies. So Sulla, he captures Rome from Marius and his allies, and he has a mini reign of terror in the city, purging all of his political enemies. And then once he felt that he was safe, he then moves his army back east to fight Mithridates. Mithridates invades Greece alongside some of his generals, and it was actually the Athenians in Athens who tried to invite Mithridates to help them get liberated from the Romans. And then Sulla, he marches into Greece and sacks the city of Athens for inviting Mithridates in. And then Sulla defeats a Pontic army at the Battle of Chaeronea. A guy named Flaccus, a different Flaccus, he reinforces Sulla, and Sulla defeats another Pontic army at the Battle of Orchomenus. So Sulla is like the hero of the war against Mithridates. At the same time, though, Flaccus is backstabbed by one of his subordinates named Fimbria, and because of this division in the Roman army, Mithridates is allowed to escape by Lucullus, and Sulla has to conclude a peace with Mithridates in order to deal with Fimbria, and Fimbria is forced to commit suicide after Sulla captures him. But the first Mithridatic War is a success. Sulla is able to drive Mithridates out of Italy, defeat him in a couple of significant battles. This isn't going to be the last war with Mithridates, though, because there's going to be some more. So while Sulla was away fighting Mithridates and dealing with the eastern problems, Marius and his supporters returned to Rome. There's a guy named Cinna who is appointed consul, or elected consul, and after his reforms for equal rights for Italians was rejected by the aristocracy, his supporters surround Rome and break into the city, and after that Marius also returns to Rome, and then Marius and his ally Cinna start a reign of terror in the city, and they order what is known as the proscriptions, which was when political enemies' names were written down on a list, and then mobs came to their houses, broke into the houses, killed them, and there were also riots and blood on the streets. And Marius, he serves 7 terms as consul. His 7th term after retaking Rome from Sulla's allies. But then Marius eventually succumbs of old age and dies, leaving Cinna in charge of the city. So then Sulla, he decides to march on Rome again to remove Marius's allies. And he's joined by a guy named Pompey and another guy named Crassus, 2 men that will also become very important in the future. So Sulla then defeats Cinna and his rivals at the Battle of the Colline Gate, and Sulla takes over Rome and appoints himself dictator for life. The first time that a Roman has appointed himself dictator by force. And Sulla begins a reign of terror, instigating the proscriptions similarly to how Marius did, except Sulla does it in a much more extreme way. Sulla then also reforms the Republican Constitution in Rome, and the Senate is actually expanded. The Senate's power is actually expanded in this. And Sulla would eventually grow old, and he would resign from his post as dictator, and he would become consul temporarily before retiring and dying in 78 BC. However, though Rome seemed to take a breath while Sulla was resigning, the all of this political turmoil in Rome, as well as the combination of foreign wars, civil wars, political maneuvering, backstabbing, blood on the streets, this all would lead to Rome's republic reaching its end not long after this, because we have a whole new generation of strongmen that would take charge in Rome, but that is a story for another time.